Colonists, I'm Tom Vessel.
And I'm Melody.
And today we're taking a look at Colonists. Now, Colonists is a Euro-style game. This is the kind of game that Melody and I both like, especially like playing two players. But there's one slight difference with Colonists than most of the other games of this that we like to play. What would you say that difference is?
Time.
Yes, the Colonists is a long game. The Colonists is broken up into eras. And do you know that in the rule book, they're like, do you know why it says 4+? Because we might add more eras in a future expansion. Yeah, it's a really long game. Now, you can play just parts of it, but you're really not getting the full game experience if you do that. This is a game of trading resources in for other resources. Another thing about this game is it has more components than almost any game I've ever seen. Here they are. Now, we're not going to go over every rule of the game, but we want to kind of just give you an idea of how the game works. So what are you trying to do in this game? You're trying to get points. You're going to get points for different buildings you have. So you can see this building here is worth 1 money, which is points. You'll also be collecting money during the game. You're not really spending it or anything. You're just going to be getting points that way. And you're also going to get points from having workers here actually working in different spots. These guys grew up here on the farm, but you're going to want to have them in other buildings. So if I have, for example, this worker here, and he's in a factory somewhere working in that factory, then he's going to be worth points for me at the end of the game. So that's really it. But the game can be somewhat long because it is 4 eras. And in each era, there's different cards or different things going on. And you can play just one era. For example, you could just play era 1 without playing the other 4. You can play era 3, but then you'd have to do like a bit of a setup to simulate that you've played through eras 1 and 2. And everything's going to revolve around this board. Now, this board is not that big. This is the very beginning, but it's going to have a lot of tiles added to it as the game goes by. You can follow a setup in the book, or you can basically build it yourselves with the other players. Each era is 5 years, and you have this card here and this marker to keep track of that. Each year is broken into 2 parts, and each part is going to give players 3 turns. And on a player's turn, they're going to start with the person who goes first, and there's going to be a market card from that era flipped over. And this market card is going to show you what happens at the different markets that are on the board. Also, there's going to be a deck of cards here that players are going to be able to use and buy that's going to match the era. And there's going to be a stack of tiles that are out, and 3 of these tiles are going to come out at the end of each year, placed by the first player for the next year. So these tiles will come here. Players can see them to see what tiles are going to come out. A player is going to be moving their envoy on their turn. At the beginning of the game, the envoy is not on the map, so you put it on a market, and then you move. When you move, you can move 1 space. So I might move here, and then here. You cannot go back to the same spot that you started. You can't end your turn on the same spot that you started with. You also can always jump to a market as one of your moves. So I could go 1, 2, 3, like that if I wanted to. And if you ever go into a spot where somebody else is, you have to pay them a fee, and that fee is going to be based on the era. It's usually you pay them a food and then some resources from that era, and it can get pretty expensive when you get to era 4. As you go into each spot, you're going to take the action of that spot. When you go to a market, you're going to take the market action. So for example, here I could take a food and a clay as my action, or I could pay 2 wood as many times as I want for 1 point each, 1 brick as many times as I want for 3 points each, or I can build a hunting lodge for 3 tools, 2 wood, and 1 clay. These are the 3 options I have every time I go to the market, and you can see that these options are going to change each year based on whatever card comes here. So for example, if you go to the market, you could simply take the first player marker. Other spots on this board, sometimes they're going to give you straight resources, like here, 2 wood. If I go to these spots, here a wood and a coin. Some spots let you change things. For example, here I can change 2 wood into 1 lumber. Some spots are going to let you build specific buildings. Like, for example, here I can build a hunting lodge for 3 tools, 2 wood and 1 clay. And I should mention that every time you go to one of these spots, you can use it as many times as you want these kind of spots. I can build as many hunting lodges as I want, unless it specifically says otherwise. Some spots are going to let you draw cards. So, for example, I go here, I get a coin, and I draw 2 cards. Cards can be played later on over here at the developer. You take 2 tools, play a card. And a card might be like this ruins, where it just gives me a brick, or this stone axe, which gives me 4 wood. But sometimes they're also going to, maybe this one here, this loam hollow, I have this card, and every year is going to produce a clay for me. Or this one here, which is like a little storehouse that I have that I can use. Sometimes it will let you build a very specific thing. This one lets me change a farm into a flat. This one here just acts as a spot for another farmer to show up. And sometimes they give you abilities to change the rules of the game. And so there's all sorts of things here. Like, for example, you no longer have to pay tools or sustenance goods when you pay the fee to other people because you've built the automobile. So those cards can be gotten and can be used. And that's kind of the main part of the game. So let's take a look at the player board here, as I was showing you earlier. Now, your player board, you're going to start with 2 farms, but you're going to get other things as time goes by. You might build more farms. Every time you build a farm, you'll get another worker there. You have a chance to upgrade a farm into a better place for people to live, into a flat. And when you upgrade to a flat, you'll take this away and you'll put this here, and then this worker basically becomes the yellow worker here, the better type of worker. And later on in the game, you're going to be able to upgrade that to a house. And when you upgrade to a house, you'll upgrade a yellow to this one. It's a red. You can also upgrade farms to estates, which then have 3 guys on them. So that's a whole lot more useful. And you can upgrade the community hall. Well, that's much more difficult. And you can upgrade the apartment. By the way, you have a 5x5 grid to build houses here. Unless you build the community hall, then you have a 6x6. But there's a lot of resources and stuff involved in getting that together. When you build many of the other buildings, so for example, let's say I build a hunting lodge. A hunting lodge gives me 1 food per turn. You must immediately put a worker in that. Here I put a farmer in there, or it doesn't work. And then at the beginning of each year, not each half year, but each year, this building is going to produce 1 food for me, which I can actually put and store on that building. You have a basic storage here, which has 3 goods. You can't have more goods than that. You have a warehouse, which has a good in it too. And you can switch goods between the warehouse and basic storage, but not in the middle of an action. It has to be before an action or after an action. But you will have the chance to build more storage sheds, which need farmers to run them. So this one here has an extra 2 goods. Later on, you'll be able to have a storage house, which has 5. And you might even be able to build a storage hall, which takes a citizen here, but can store 9 goods. You can have as many tools and as much money as you want. That's the only 2 resources. You can spend as much as you want, but you're going to build all sorts of buildings. Here's a tailor shop, which will produce basically a robe for you each turn. A pub, which produces 1 money, or maybe a theater, which produces 2 money every turn. You have a factory, which you can put any of the 3 types of workers in, and it will add 1 to the production of all workers of that type. Here's an iron mine, which produces 2 iron per turn. Here's a forester's house, which produces 2 wood per turn, or a hollow, which produces 1 clay per turn. A boarding house gives you another envoy that you can put on a board and move things around. So you can move either envoy then, and you can get a horse, which gives you +1 movement. There's all sorts of buildings that you can buy. There's a library, which lets you draw 4 cards when you're drawing cards and pick the 2 that you're going to keep. But of course, you're limited to what you have, the space that you have here as you build these houses. And you're going to have to determine, first of all, you need to make sure you have enough farms and apartments and flats, etc., to be able to have enough workers to put out here. But also, once you put out the yellow and red workers, when you put a yellow worker out, you need to pay a food. And then every year, you need to keep paying a food to keep these guys working. Just like this guy here, he'll need a food and clothing to work each turn and when you send him out. So if you're going to start using these guys, you're going to need to make sure you're producing food and things like that, and hopefully upping your storage. Now, there's 1 more building that's out there, or 1 more spot to go to, and the diplomat. And this is something that kind of changes the whole game. There are different colonies that come with this game, And at the beginning of the game, you choose 4 of them, or you pick 4 random. And each of these, so let's say these are the 4 colonies, the laborer, altruist, trader, and envoy colony. These are the 4 colonies that you have. When you go to the diplomat spot, you can pay the cost to build an embassy to that colony. So here, for example, I pay 1 tool, 3 wood, and 2, and I'll build an embassy to that colony. So let's say I build an embassy to the trader colony. I would take this and put it out. And what that does is when you put out an embassy, you have that ability. Now in each area, you can only go up to level 1 in level 1 area, and then 2 and 3 and 4, but your special abilities get better. So for example, if you work on the envoy colony, you get an extra envoy, just like that one building gives you. Eventually, you can jump to the diplomat spot. Your envoys can move an extra spot. And then whenever you go here, you get a tool whenever you take that action. The trader colony basically gives you ways where you can trade goods for each other all the time. The altruist colony is basically a way to get free stuff every turn, because why not? It also puts this pawn on the board who will give you a discount based on where that pawn moves to. The laborer colony lets you use the wrong workers in the wrong buildings. The industrialist colony here is going to help with your production of goods. The alchemist colony lets you immediately change one thing to another thing. The scholar colony lets you get more cards. The storekeeper colony lets you get more spots on the board and lets you upgrade your storage buildings into buildings that can hold even more goods. The lord colony lets you basically walk wherever you want and ignore the actions and do what you want and not have to pay the fee to the other players. And so you are going to be picking these. You'll have a 5th colony added in turn 3. And how you put those colonies here will give you special abilities that you can use. And like I said, this board is going to change. You'll be adding more markets at a certain point in time. And all sorts of new tiles are going to come out in each era. I should mention that there's a lot of pieces in this game. There are a lot of different resources. There's a huge amount of buildings. I don't have them sorted there because it takes a lot of work to sort them out. But just realize all the different pieces in this game. The board's going to get bigger and bigger. And at the end of the at the end of the 4th era, if you're playing a complete game, you'll take a score sheet. You'll get points for all your buildings, embassies, and improvements that you've done and how much money you have on hand. And then you get 2 points for every farmer that's working, 6 points for every citizen, that's the yellow worker, and 16 points for every red worker that's in a building. You'll add your points together. Most points is the winner of the game. Okay, so the thing about the colonists, when you talk to people about it, the biggest thing that people are going to say is time. And time is definitely a factor. You can, so I know there's someone watching it going, youngsters these days don't have the time, blah, blah. Look, this game is long. We're talking 6, 7, 8 hours. And that's with 2 people, okay? If we have not played this with more players, and I don't even want to, because the game has easy and hard difficulty type things to it. Like there's easy setups and harder setups where it's easier to get to the resources. You can even throw in another market to move around. But I want it to be that easy because the game already is so long. You don't want it to be long and difficult. And the more people who play, the more people who are going to block your spots, and you have to pay fees to get to those spots. Mm-hmm. The game is basically get resources, build buildings with those resources.
To get more resources, to build better buildings.
Right. Now, I don't dislike that concept as a whole. In fact, some of our games that we have, I mean, in some instances, this is a little similar to Le Havre. It's just longer. Now, the eras are separated because things get bigger and better, kind of, sort of, but they also get harder to do, and you need to get paid. Then you got to start feeding your people and things. So the length is going to be a detractor to it. I mean, most people aren't going to want to play a game that long. The other detractor is the pieces. Now, don't get me wrong. I love a box full of pieces, but this one's kind of ridiculous. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Feast for Odin had a lot of pieces, but it came with trays to keep all those pieces in. This one has no trays, and you have like 12 different buildings with double sides. And how many different resources are there? There's like 10 different kinds of resources.
Not to mention the many, many, many different buildings that you need to look for each time you buy one.
Oh, we sort them out in piles because the game's so long. We would pack it up to play later, and then we had to resort out the buildings. And it's too much. There was just pieces all over the place. And again, this is with 2 people. And the board itself, as we're adding those tiles to it, gets bigger and bigger, and I'd be like, oh, where's the tile that lets me build this kind of building? And I'm looking around on the board for it. So, too many pieces, which is weird for me to say, too long, but is the game any good?
I thought it was fun. It was interesting. I like games where you have to get resources to get buildings. That'll give you resources to get you even better buildings. And I think that's pretty cool. But this one, it was just annoying to me. Because I would get resources, and sometimes I'm like, I either didn't have enough room for the resources that I needed, which could be solved, but that would take like 3 turns just to get the storage. And in that factor, it just felt like there's too little time to get everything, but I didn't want the game to go longer.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? This game is a really long game that should feel more epic than it does. In a sense, like Melody says, we would have 3 turns, and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this. Oh, I get to do my awesome thing later. Okay, I got to wait for that. And by the time you get to it, it just seems like it takes a long time.
And at the end of the game, you don't really feel like you really accomplished anything. Like, I was excited, like, I got the stables. Like, it took me forever to do it, and I didn't have much time left to even use it. So.
Yeah, see, this game is a worker movement game. Now, these are becoming more and more common these days, where instead of putting a worker on the board, you can move your worker throughout the board. And this one also lets you jump to markets. I don't even know what the reasoning behind that is, but you can jump to a market, I guess, but I don't know what the thematic reasoning for that is, and then move. But worker movement games can be tough because you're like, oh, I want to go do this, well, I have to find a way to get over there. And Melody mentioned the horses, which gives you +1, but like she said, it took a long time to get to that point. You can't get those before Era 3. So for a while, it feels like you're slowly walking across the board. Mm-hmm. But another thing Melody mentioned that I found annoying about this game, and this is one of those annoying things I think a designer could have just cut, and that's the storage. All right, you have these storage spaces, and then you have the
warehouse.
The warehouse, and then the buffers, they call them, these places that produce resources. This game, I think, for no reason at all.
Too hard to get resources.
Yeah, but what I mean is, they're like, okay, you can't use a resource directly from the warehouse, but right before your turn, you can switch goods from the warehouse with goods that aren't in the warehouse. So you're switching them out and then spending them and then switching them back, and it's like, why are we going all this work? This adds this whole extra silly level. I know that they wanted to keep the amount of goods that you can have. That's fine, but they overcomplicated it. But they also made it necessary. Like, you need to get a storehouse in your first turn. I can't imagine you not doing that. You need a storehouse in your first or second turn because you have to be able to store these goods. You can store 3 plus your 1 in your warehouse. That's it. And just these constant moving and shuffling the goods around, and to me, it added confusion. The game itself is not that complex. Melody and I played through the tutorial game first, and about halfway through, we were like, all right, we know how to play this. And that was nice that they had that in there, but the game almost is that same thing for another 8 hours. Was there anything about the game that you really liked?
The different community things, those were cool.
Are you talking about the embassies?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, right. Those are great. Well, I don't think you can play without them, but our first introductory game, we didn't bring them in, and we should have because they were just really great. When they give you like these special abilities that you can, it's basically like you're buying special abilities, and it kind of gave us a goal on what to go for.
Yeah, and the cards too. After, I didn't really use the cards until like Era 4, but once I started getting them, I was like, I really should have started getting these sooner. It gave me more goals, because most of the time I was just like, I guess I go here to get this one thing, and then I'm going to wait, and then do it again. And because like even there's a lot of options, but it was hard to do those options because just getting the resources, it took forever. And
no, I hear Melody, and I certainly agree with this. The embassies are fun, and it's good to get those things, but it does take a while to get to them. And then it just almost felt, and the cards were interesting, but my biggest problem with the cards were they felt sometimes lucky. Sometimes you get the card you wanted.
I got garbage cards.
You go draw cards that you don't want, and you've essentially wasted a turn. And in this game, wasting a turn is a really big deal. You want to make sure you have something all the time.
Although I did like some of the funny comments on the cards. Apparently, the people in this city are stupid and leave their stuff behind, or their stuff is extremely weak and break.
That's true. There is some comedy on the cards. Here's the deal. When we're done with Colonists, we're like, oh, wow, interesting. Okay, here's a score. Okay, I know what to do next time.
Do I want to play next time?
Yeah, when is next time? See, when we played Feast for Odin. I still remember our very first game of Feast for Odin. When we were done, we were like, oh, man, we didn't do very well. But the second time we played, now we know what to do, okay? We jump in. The third time I play, like, I really know what to do. But this game takes 7 to 8 hours. I don't have time to learn how to get better in this game. It just seems like it seems like what they did is they took one of the great Rosenberg games, or even Yokohama here, which there's some similarities to Yokohama in this game too. They take these games, which are 90 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours at the most. Feast for Odin can be 3, I guess, but mostly 2-hour games. And they stretched it out to twice the length, but didn't add in that much more game.
No.
So for that reason, for me, I think I would pass on this. What rating would you give this?
Probably a 5.
This one's hard for me. I think I'm going to give it a 6, which is really close because 6 means Dice Tower approved, and I kind of approve this, but only if you have
Enough time and patience.
Right, if you have tons of time to play games, you're retired maybe, and you want to play games all the time, but I like it. It was interesting, but why would I play this over a Game of Le Havre and a Feast for Odin, which are better games
And faster.
And I know that whenever we talk this, there's always been people in the comments who are like, well, you don't like long games. No, this is a long game. This is the Twilight Imperium of Euro games, except it has the grandeur of that. So, The Colonist. Anyway, I'm Tom Basil.
And I'm Melody.
And this has been Double Trouble.
Boom!
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.